Hey, good evening and welcome to Having a Catch with Joey Buckholz. Tonight's guest, an old friend of mine. We're going to talk about some of the things we used to do in Thiensville, Wisconsin. This is Bill Johnson. Bill, welcome to the show.
Joey, it's a pleasure, man. Thank you.
And so, Bill, if you guys saw the promo that we filmed a couple days ago that we aired last Thursday, Bill joked that he's a disgraced former sports radio personality here in Milwaukee. So, Bill, actually, when I aired that promo last week, I had at least a half a dozen people say, "Is that Bill Johnson from the game?"
Yeah,
I'm so excited. So
it's me. I'm just skinnier now.
So, tell us about how you got started in the career of radio. Because I listened to you for, and I'm estimating here, probably 10, 15 years, from like 3 to 6 on the various shows that you did. I worked in a bank setting, so I was in an office.
Yeah.
And then when I had a 45-minute drive home each night, so I spent a lot of time listening to you. But how did all of that start? I'm assuming you probably had aspirations as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, and you and I talked about this a little bit, but I was the youngest in my extended family by a lot. And my extended family was a bunch of, this was the early 70s, so it was a bunch of very loud people. And they got louder when they had one or two drinks. So I always wanted to fit in. I mean, even though I was just this little kid. So in order to fit in, A, I had to be vocal. And B, I had to know something about sports and music and pop culture. So that's kind of where I think I got into it to start with. And the weird part is I'm the only one that went into it professionally. I went to college at Stevens Point. What my aspiration all along was to get into radio. It ended up taking a little longer than I thought it would after school, but I started a show in Stevens Point that still goes on, the Saturday Morning Freak Show, which you can hear on 90 FM. If you go up there, Jim Oliva still hosts it. I still get up there and play trivia. I still get up there for the reunion weekend and stuff, which is very, very nice. I started at AUK in Waukesha, which, I mean, you want to talk about little dumpy radio station. Little dumpy radio station. But we did the best we could out there. I think I started there in about 95. The best thing that ever happened to us was the day that Good Karma and Craig Karmazin bought the station, because that's when it turned into a real radio station. I think the thing that people remember the most about me is working with Steve Haywood, who was one of my dearest friends, and still miss him today. Still miss arguing with him today, I guess, more than anything. But he was a guy that gave me perspective. He was a guy that made me look at things differently, and I think that always helps. I think that's a lot of what we're missing today is just this ability to look at things differently and look at someone else's point of view. And I think that was the greatest gift that Steve gave, although he wouldn't say that. He would give me something else. He would disagree with me just to disagree with me. So, but then, we moved down to downtown Milwaukee, which, was great. Had fun. Loved working with Drew and Dan. Fantastic. Still have a replica of the Dan Needles era here, the ABC Sports hat. I talked to you about the big banner that I still have hanging at my house, because technically ABC Sports hasn't existed for a long time. But I loved working with those guys. Circumstances brought me up to Beaver Dam, which was the original Good Karma station, and I worked there for years. My departure from radio was very simple. From Good Karma anyway, it was very simple. So 2007, I was in Milwaukee, and I had a disagreement with one of the salespeople, who now is, still I would consider a friend. Had a disagreement. It got a little loud. And Craig Karmazin brought me into his office and said, if you ever do this again, you're getting fired. So I never did it again until 2017 when I had a loud disagreement with a salesperson in Beaver Dam. And sure enough, Craig held true to his word. So that's why I left there. Not by my own choice. And I hold nothing against Craig or the company or anything. I mean, he was perfectly within his rights to do that, and that's fine. And I wish them well. I was given an opportunity by Tim Scott, which I really appreciate, to work down in Madison kind of on a part-time level. And I did it for a while. It just the driving ended up being kind of a burden. COVID came a little late for me because if they would have done stuff online, I might still be on with them. Who knows? I loved working with those guys. It was a lot of fun. Obviously loved doing all the play-by-play with UWM especially, and all the high school play-by-play that I did and that kind of thing. I was reminded. I'm babbling. I'm sorry.
No. That's what we're here for.
Oh, good. Perfect spot for me. No, but I was reminded because I work at Walmart now, and I work with a guy named Steve Payne, who played basketball at the University of Detroit when I was doing play-by-play for UWM. And he also was an assistant coach at the University of Detroit. And he asked me, well, who was the first staff when you started at UWM? Well, Bo Ryan was the head coach. Rob Jeter was his top assistant. Greg Gard was his second assistant. And Saul Phillips was his third assistant. And he looked at me and he goes, that's a pretty good staff. Because all those guys either have or are still head coaches, other than Bo because he retired. But
yeah,
I was pretty fortunate considering I came there the first year that they were there too, and UWM had been hot, moist garbage until that point. There's my first Steve Haywood quote of the night, by the way. But yeah, so I was lucky with them. I was lucky with Bruce and the group there too, and then I loved working with Rob and Boudreaux and Duffy and the gang, for the years that I worked there too. So I wish them well. Wish they had a different athletic director, but I wish them well.
So one of the things that we mentioned early on is doing that 3:00 show. I think it was 3 to 6, right? With
Yep.
Steve, the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have a lot of people in this group that are that aspire to be on the radio or just kind of be involved with sports in general. How much prep each day goes into a 3-hour show to make it not just sustainable but really entertaining? You guys were Monday through Friday every week for many years.
It all depends who you are, and it depends who you're working with, and that's the luckiest part of it. Steve and I would just look at each other and say hello. I mean, I honestly, I think people remember sometimes Steve would show up at 3:15. I mean, and I mean, I can't say that I showed up that much earlier, but we knew, we weren't going to be cheating anybody if we showed up and this was the first time we were looking at each other. We were still going to be the same. I mean, so it was fine. It was cool. Because at that time, both of us were, doing other things. I think Steve was doing some stringing and some other reporting, and he was going to games at night. He would go to, all the Bucks games, obviously, and he would go to a lot of the Marquette games and stuff like that. I was going to every Admirals game at that point. So we were doing stuff at night. And nobody ever held our feet to the fire about doing show prep because the show always sounded the same. And the people that liked it, the people that didn't. It was kind of that way.
The thing I loved about the show is that, and you kind of hinted at it earlier, is that even when you guys had differing opinions about things, it was entertaining, and it wasn't. I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, one of the things that I see a lot now, especially on TV, and to be honest, I haven't listened to sports radio in probably 10 years.
Yeah.
whether local or national. But
Right.
this new formula of loud and obnoxious versus loud and obnoxious, it doesn't work for me. Like
Yeah.
Shannon Sharp, Skip, what's his name?
Skip Bayless won. I mean, that's the thing that
Yeah.
bugs me is Skip Bayless won because Skip Bayless is still there, and Skip Bayless is a useless piece of shit, and he always has been. I mean, I thought he was a shitty writer.
Yeah.
He's a shitty radio host. He's maybe we'll talk about punk rock later, but I mean, he's a poser. He's like those guys. I mean, he's a fake. He's a phony. He always has been. And the sad part about it is he won. So he's making all the money, and I'm sitting in my basement.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand. I guess maybe, and you can, this is probably the fact. It just comes down to, are they getting the ratings or not? Because
Right.
I agree with you on Skip Bayless. I think he's terrible. I'm not a big fan of.
I wasn't as negative as you are on Shannon. I mean, I was, it depends on who he's coupled with, you know.
But just the formula of like, it has to be loud and you both have to be obnoxious, and it's almost as if, and I guess every good movie or TV show needs that conflict, but it almost seems like they're going to say like, all right, what are you guys the most opposite on, and we're just going to talk about that and just make it be like super annoying, and like
Right.
Kellerman and Stephen A. Smith, I never understood that chemistry, and they're done. I think I think one of them, they took off, and I don't know, it just with you and Steve, it was always just fun and entertaining, and even if you did disagree on something, it was fun to listen to, because you guys like, you can tell that it was tongue in cheek, and it was like, hey, we're just having fun here on the radio. And I don't hear that anymore on the local or the national level, and maybe I'm just not tuned into the right shows.
Steve and I had plenty of real arguments off the air, though, too.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's just, I think that's just part of any relationship, though. I mean, any real relationship that you have with somebody, all of a sudden you're going to get off the air and say, that was, you were a jackass there, right? And usually it was Steve saying that to me. So, but I mean, it's hard. People have been trying to recreate real for a long time. You can't. Either it's real or it's not real. I mean, it's Madden and Summerall. I mean, it's a, you can think of, it's Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon.
Yeah.
It's things that don't seem to make sense, but when you look back at it, you're like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. And you just can't. And then advertisers try to recreate it and try to say, well, this will be the next real thing. We'll put this person with. No, you don't know. You have no clue.
You're going to have to probably refresh my memory. I forget what year it was. It must have been like 99.
Oh, geez.
I was listening to, in the mornings, I think it was Scott Abley and Matt Marchese, maybe.
You sure it wasn't Abley and me?
Well, it could have been, because I think you and I met in like 96, 97, 98. So it might have been you and Abley, but I remember Marchese was on for a bit, and I was listening to the morning show very loyally for years and years and years. And then one morning, it was Greeny and Golick, and I'm like, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't to be honest, I don't remember any type of warning that says, hey, on this date it's going to be. Well, do you remember?
I think that was when I think that was when Good Karma took over, I believe. Now that I'd completely forgotten about that, but I think it was when Good Karma took over.
Did they just come in one day and say, hey, starting on Monday, it's going to be a national show?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because Craig came in and he had a connection with ESPN Radio.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the way it was. Somebody will probably watch this and tell me I'm completely wrong, but I think that's the way it went. And I mean, that's fine. It's his company.
Yeah,
I still had a job. I was happy.
I just remember, like, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I like this, because like I'm very loyal to like procedure and like, my thing, and it's like, all right,
Yeah.
I'm used to these guys, and now we're getting this whole national thing, and
See,
obviously it led to
radio used to be a lot more like that though too.
yeah,
I mean, radio would respond to like quarterly ratings. So, I mean, we all kind of remember that same radio station we listened to forever, but then if we look back on it and listen, I mean, all of a sudden there's another guy here, you know? I mean,
yeah.
what happened? Because I grew up listening to Jim Rodeo and Gene Miller. And all of a sudden, here's Jim Rodeo and Keith Harmon. Oh, well, what happened to Gene Miller? Well, it ends up it was Gene Miller's own choice, and he went over to KTI. But, and I still have some Facebook communication, at least with both of those guys, because they were. I mean, I was a high school kid at the time. They were my heroes. All those guys were. I don't know whatever happened to Rodeo, but I grew up in Lannon, which is close to Menominee Falls, and
Okay.
that's where the legendary WZMF was. You want to talk about the closest thing to an outlaw radio station in the world? This little outpost, like a couple miles from the hospital in Menominee Falls, and they would just sit out there and smoke weed and play great music, and it was fantastic. But no, loved QFM, loved LPX, loved all those old Milwaukee radio stations.
I still, like, when I think of FM radio from a kid, I still think of Reitman and Miller from 94.5.
Very successful.
And back then, like, their formula was, old, or like 70s and 80s. And now what's sad is that those same songs are on the oldies station. Like, I hear like Uptown Girl, and that's considered an oldie now, when that was like the first cassette I ever
But they
got.
didn't even play much music at all. They just
not on their show. Yeah, it was
anyway. So
yeah, they'd play like one record, and then they talk for like 40 minutes. But like that's still, that formula of like I still think Dave Luzak is on TV or on the radio.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but same station, but a different like partner.
Because I remember Dave and Carol. Definitely.
Dave and Carol.
Yeah.
And then there was Frosty and JoJo. I still remember them.
Yep, don't remember them. I remember hearing about them. I don't think I ever listened to them.
They were on like the hip hop channel that was like right.
That's
on the
why
dial.
I didn't listen to them.
Yeah, exactly. I think I found them by accident one day, because they were 102, and then Bob and Brian were 102.9 or something. So it was like,
yep,
you find it by accident. It's almost like how you find like some of these UHF stations when we were a kid. Like, oh, there's channel 18. All right, well, let's see. Oh, we got wrestling. We got the bowling game. All right,
I do remember Bob and Brian. I did listen to Bob and Brian, and Drew was actually, because I think Drew appeared on their show intermittently, kind of talking about the Brewers and sports and Springsteen or whatever. But I do. I remember those guys definitely. The thing I remember about ZMF, they had a booth down at State Fair. And I would go to State Fair with my parents. This was the late 1970s, and they would just let me loose, and they'd go do whatever the hell they wanted to do, and figure I'd go on some rides. I went and stood down by the ZMF booth. You want to talk about the blue cloud over the ZMF booth? My goodness. Whew. It was something. And then the QFM booth became that too. So I always enjoyed, because we always did, whenever Summerfest was live, we did Summerfest live down at the grounds, and that was always fun, always interesting. I remember when they grossly miscast Hank Williams Jr. as the guy that could just play at the country stage rather than the main stage, and they literally had people bulging through the crowd all the way out to the lake watching Hank Williams Jr. because there were so many people who wanted to see him there.
That's amazing. At what point when you were at ESPN were you approached about doing the play-by-play for UW Milwaukee? Because I was there from, I think, 03 to 12, so there's a little bit of overlap where we were both working basically on the same campus.
No, it was independent because Yeah, we didn't. The games were not on our stations. The games were on OKY, as I recall. They might have been on EMP for a while too. We talked about my short-term memory, but I think they were on 1250 for a while. They were on 920 for a while, but that was just a deal between me and UWM. I knew a guy there named Jason Clark, who was the director of sports information, and I think Dwayne Mosley had been doing the play-by-play for them, and he left, and they asked me to do it, and I said sure. I just happened to stumble into it the year that Bo Ryan got the job. I mean, you want to talk about dumb luck? Holy cow! Because they sucked. I mean, they were terrible. Everybody just killed them every year, and all of a sudden, this guy steps in with the same guys, and they're beating the best teams in the league right away. No, it was fun, and I lucked out with Bo. I lucked out with Bruce, who, for all of his suspected foibles, is still a great guy, and I would still love to hang with Bruce because he's cool. And then Rob. I mean, Rob is still a good friend, and the guys on his staff are, and the players are too. I think one of my favorite moments was the fact that after I got let go, we had a party at Major Goolsby's, and all the current players and all the coaches showed up, and we had a good time, and it was fun. But then my wife and I both got invited to Matt Tybey's wedding, and we went down there to Iowa for the wedding, and it was phenomenal. It was so much fun. People have asked me who my favorite. Stop it, you! I told you she'd be a problem. Damn it, this goddamn cat. So I mean, it was such a good time. People have asked me who my favorite UWM player was over the years, and it's literally like picking your favorite kid. You can't do it. I mean, there were so many that were so talented, and I mean, I can pick favorite plays and stuff like that, but there's no way in hell I could ever pick a favorite player just because, God, just to mention, I mean, like Ed McCants, Dylan Page, Boo Davis, there was just so many of them that were just so good. Matt Tybee, like I said, and I still have, like we all have now, we have like cyber relationships with people. I still, connect with them and look at their kids and talk about how cute they are and stuff. But no, that was a lot of fun, and there's so many memories that I have from that. And it's funny now because I work with Steve Payne, like I said, who worked at Detroit, and I can remember one night we left Detroit, and this I think was the night that Ed McCants did the best dunk I've ever seen live. The fans from Detroit threw rocks at our bus as we were leaving. That was something.
As a fan, as a general fan of sports, what is your favorite to follow on just a day-to-day basis? Just like from your couch.
You know what? I guess I'm on the NFL now, but ever since I got out of the business, I almost feel like a slacker. I'm not keeping track of anything. But I still, when I can, I still watch the Packers. I love it when the local teams win. I was thrilled that the Bucs won the championship again. They won the championship the last time when I was like 2 or 3, something like that. So, but I just don't, I don't eat it up the way I used to eat it up, Kind of the same way. Like people, I think they mislabel me as a sports nut. I'm really not. I'm a baseball nut who just happens to watch the NFL because I run 2 fantasy football leagues. And running those leagues was a byproduct of Reggie White signing with the Packers. Right.
Like when he signed with the Packers, it was such a big news item that I was like, how are we celebrating this? What are we doing?
And I was shocked. I'm still shocked.
Because I remember he was on the cover of Sports Illustrated, and they had like 4 teams, like which one's going to sign him. And I'm a Cleveland Browns fan, and I was under the assumption, and again, back then there was no internet.
Right.
So all I had to rely on was like Sports Illustrated articles or maybe Sports Center clips or whatever. But I honestly thought he was coming to Cleveland. When he signed to Green Bay, I was like, okay, well, that's a nice consolation prize. I live in a Green Bay household.
Right.
This is pretty cool. But I really wasn't much of an NFL fan at the time, other than watching the Packers every Sunday, kind of following what the Browns were doing. And when Reggie signed with Green Bay, we started fantasy football, and that was this is year 30 coming up now. And I've always said this, and I've got some of the guys that are in my league now. If you take fantasy football away from it, I'm much less interested. Like I can't watch a Jacksonville, Arizona game on a Thursday unless I own one of the kickers. I just can't do it. And I think part of it is the X's and O's. Like I played baseball, I coached baseball, I played basketball, I coached basketball. I never played football. I can't tell you what a nickel defense is as opposed to a dime. I just can't. So I think it's just as a spectator, like I look at the NFL almost like I do wrestling. Like I'm just entertained. I don't try to understand a lot of it. I'm here to enjoy it as much as I can. But people, they always say like, "Oh, you're just big sports nut." Really, it's just baseball for me.
Right.
And I liked playing basketball. I like watching football, but I'm just a baseball guy. That's
The only thing I would say about football is this, and I did play. I played through my junior year of high school. But just in watching it, I would say, because they talk about all the different offenses and the different theories and all this stuff, I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong when you watch games, I would say at least 8 out of 10 times, maybe 8.5 out of 10 times, the more physical team wins. I mean, I don't care what offense they're playing. When you take those guys that are at the front, whether it's 5-on-3 or 5-on-4 or however they're lined up and whatever, it's the more physical team that wins. It doesn't matter what system they run or any of that other crap. Or, I guess too, and I have to mention this as somebody that's lived here, it matters who your quarterback is. I would say more physical and good quarterback are number 1 and 2, because I grew up with the Packers being crappy. I grew up with the Brewers being crappy. When they got better players, all of a sudden they were better. Go figure. Better players at better positions. I mean, all of a sudden the Brewers have Raleigh Fingers, a guy that can, once you have a lead in the 8th inning, you're going to win. All of a sudden, after sucking for however many years, the Packers have Brett Favre. Then Brett Favre gets mad and leaves, and they have Aaron Rodgers. Now, where do we go after this? Well, we'll see. But I still think in football, I think physicality, and that's what's kind of counter to what our society is now. We oh boy, you're going to like this one. We're living in a West Coast offense society. We're living in a society where we think that you can finesse your way to success. And maybe there are some fields of life where you can. In football, you cannot finesse your way to success. You have to have, at this point, 290-pound guys that can run like running backs on either side of your quarterback in order to win. Good luck.
It's a different game now than what I grew up in. When I started watching games pretty closely in like the late 80s, where if you scored 20 points, you were going to win. And now if you score 20 points, you're going to go 3-13 for averaging 20. And
score 20 points in the first quarter, you might lose.
Yeah. It's funny because the Browns had a 28-0 lead in a playoff game last year, and they won by 9.
Yeah. I don't like their quarterback. I'm sorry.
And you don't have to apologize. I actually, every year when this Facebook memory comes up, I share it as proof. In 2018, I just moved back from Ohio, and so I was listening to this draft build up for a year, and everyone was talking about Trubisky and Baker and all that. And I don't watch a ton of college football, but the one guy that I saw maybe half a dozen times that I was really impressed with was Josh Allen.
Yeah.
And people would say, "Well, what do you want them to do at 1?" And I said, "Well, they have 1-4 this year. This is 2018." I said, "I'd like for them to take Saquon Barkley at 1 because I think he's like the next Adrian Peterson, and then I want them to at 4 to take Josh Allen because he's actually of the 5 or 6 quarterbacks coming out. I was the most impressed with the eye test, the leadership and stuff like that. I'm like, he's not gonna be the first pick overall. So let's get him at 4." And then they took Mayfield at 1 and Denzel Ward at 4. Mayfield, great rookie year, terrible year 2. Great third year, not so great this year. So we'll see. I will say that they got to win the Super Bowl next year, or at least a couple playoff games if he's going to be back in 23. I think he'll be there for one more year. But at the same time, you've got some pretty decent guys coming out of college and that are going to be free agents. Maybe you bring in a guy just to challenge him a little bit because I don't hate him, but he hasn't shown me that he's a Super Bowl caliber quarterback yet.
Well, and I think part of it too is the endorsements. Whenever a guy that's not terribly successful has endorsements, I think people get a little pissed off about it. But I mean, especially with your tweet, you have to think when they played the Packers this year, if they had Josh Allen at quarterback, they win that game.
Yeah.
They might kick the shit out of the Packers in that game, actually.
Yeah. Because I think Mayfield had, 3 or 4 interceptions.
It was terrible. He was awful.
Yeah, and they lost by 2. So, I don't know. People are asking me, like, well, who are you rooting for when the Browns aren't in it? And obviously, I'm in a Packer household. But I would like to see Josh Allen win one just so I can frame this tweet from 2018 and say, see what I told you?
Right. No, I mean, and I think you've been right about that. And a lot of it too, to be fair to Baker, a lot of it is coaching staff, situation, things like that. But we get back to my original comment too. A lot of it is physicality. Do you draft for physicality or do you draft for scoring? And there are people that will argue either way. I always argue with people that say the 49ers weren't physical. That's crap. Look at their lines on both sides. They were physical as hell. They would beat the living tar out of you. Yeah, Jerry Rice, would go out and catch a bunch of touchdowns in Montana and stand back there and throw, but they were physical as hell on both sides of the line. It's physicality, number one.
And people forget too that those Niners teams that won all those Super Bowls, they always had the dual running backs that each had 1,000 and corners that could hit and everything. It just Rice and Montana.
And they always had a dedicated fullback, which is what a lot of teams don't have now.
Yeah, I can't downs. Even. And again, in this day and age of the NFL, I don't know if I can name 5 fullbacks in 2022 because of how offenses are designed, and it's just a different game.
See, I got you talking about football. You talked about how you don't even like football. We've been sitting here talking about football for 15 minutes.
I mean, I could, again, baseball is my heart, but as I get older, nowadays, like when I said I didn't understand football, that was 1993's Joey. Now I understand the difference between 5 wide and an I formation and all that. But yeah, I mean, once baseball season starts, then I won't be able to stop. This will go on for 6-7 hours.
Well, now, what was the first thing? I'm interviewing you. What was the first thing that made you love baseball?
I've talked about this a couple times on the show. It was when I was 6 years old. I was living in Boston, and I actually joked about this a couple weeks ago. For the year I lived in Boston, I thought we lived in Boston Because when we moved back, I would tell new friends like, "Oh, we just moved from Boston," and Mom would say Moston with an M. For a year, I thought we were in Massachusetts, but my cousin took me to a park one day, and we found a baseball glove, and it wasn't ours, but she picked it up, put it on my hand, and we played catch, and I was just enchanted with this glove, and I thought it was mine. Now, she said, "Well, you know what? This could be someone else's, so we're going to put it back. We'll come back tomorrow. If it's still there, you can have it." And all night, I was just enchanted with the idea of that this glove is going to be mine.
Didn't sleep.
Didn't sleep. It's probably the earliest memory I have of me just being restless. And the next day we went, and it was in the exact same spot. She put it on my hand. We played again, and I haven't taken it off in my mind in 40 years. I mean, it was like 82.
That's cool.
Yeah, and it got to the point, and we'll talk about music here in a couple minutes, but it got to the point where I was so obsessed with baseball, and I always had a glove in my hand, to the point where my mom got me guitar lessons, because one year for Christmas I got an actual guitar.
Oh, cool.
And
what kind of guitar?
It was an acoustic. It was red.
Oh, okay.
That's all I could tell you.
Well, that's cool. I got a red one.
I actually have somewhere around here, I've got a picture from Christmas '84, and I'm posing with it, and you can just tell I don't look natural holding it. But by my second or third lesson, and because I took guitar lessons at Brown Deer Library.
Okay.
They had like a back room for like music lessons. By the second or third one, I told the instructor, I said, I like listening to music, but I want to be outside playing baseball.
No.
And she's like, well, that's, we'll let your mom know. And I don't think Mom was disappointed, because it led to me like playing baseball for 8 years. But, every now and then I think like, oh, I'd like to learn piano, or maybe pick up a guitar at some point again. But it just never came naturally to me as did playing baseball.
See, guitar is easier just from a personal standpoint, because piano, you have to learn how to read music. Guitar, you just have to learn how to play tabs. Like I said, I tried to play piano. I took piano lessons before I took guitar lessons, and I sucked at piano. Took guitar lessons. Of course, I walked into my guitar teacher in 1978 or whatever it was, and this guy named Gary that was probably in 4 bands and had long nails on his right hand. And he's like, well, what do you want to learn? I said, I want to learn Purple Haze by Jimi Hendrix. And he taught it to me. And to this day, I can still rock it out from time to time. But I never, when I tried to play piano, I tried to learn how to read music. I was terrible at it. I have friends that are much better at it. A lot of friends that are really good musicians. And I just kind of hang out in the background and play rhythm guitar and maybe a couple of leads here now and then. And I can maybe sing in the same vocal range as some dude.
That's probably one of the reasons I never came back to it, is because it always came back to baseball in some aspect, even like professionally. Yeah. And I've been a business owner. I had a 23-year career in banking, but I was always thinking about baseball, like coaching, and boy, I'd like to play again at some point. And I just think baseball has always been kind of that first love for me, where it's just hard to give any more time to anything else, because I feel like it's not going to get the same attention.
See, my first memories of baseball, and like I said before, my extended family was so much older, so I tried to fit in. I remember the Brewers when I was young, when we got the Brewers. And I just also remember my cousins being all pissed about the Braves and always hating the Braves because they moved to Atlanta. But so once we got the Brewers, I remember George Scott. I remember Johnny Briggs. I remember, Sixto Lascano. I remember Jim Colburn. I remember all these guys. They were bad teams, but I remember those dudes. But in order to enjoy baseball, I had to pick a team I liked. So I love the A's. And I think maybe this has to do with my early love of music and, dudes with big handlebar mustaches and stuff, because people don't remember baseball had kind of an unofficial rule about facial hair until the 1972 Oakland A's, when they were able to grow mustaches, and they all did. Reggie Jackson, Gene Tennis, all those guys. So that kind of became my favorite team, and I guess I picked the right time for them to be my favorite team, because they beat the Reds and they beat the Mets. Sorry. They won. Oh, and then they beat the Dodgers. So they won three World Series in a row. Yeah. They were a good other favorite team to have.
I just finished a book about that team, and the story of how the facial hair came out was, I think it was Reggie actually that came into spring training one day having one, and Charlie Finley, the owner of the A's at the time, said, "Well, I could either fine him, or we could market this," and they actually made it mandatory. So everybody on that team within 3 weeks had it. And not only did he not fine the players, he gave them all $300 bonuses if they can grow it out.
And there was a guy that couldn't grow one, as I recall, and I can't think of his name, but Charlie might have fined him for not being able to grow a mustache. And now I can't think of his name.
And they were, I'm probably butchering the stat here, but I think they were the first team to actually have anybody have facial hair.
Right.
From 1949 through 71, I don't think there was anyone.
Right. It was,
and then the A's.
I think the weird part is, I think it was totally unwritten. I don't think it was ever a written rule.
Yeah.
But the weird part then is when Del Crandall gets fired and Alex Grammas gets hired as the manager of the Brewers. Alex Grammas was an assistant for Sparky Anderson. And as cool as Sparky was, he was one of the guys that was very, insistent about the facial hair rule. So all of a sudden, when Alex Grammas gets hired, all the Brewers have to shave their mustaches. And they've all had them. I mean, Johnny Briggs and George Scott and Jim Colburn and, all those dudes all had them. So, yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, it was just so strange that unwritten rule went on as long as it did.
Yeah, and that the players kind of self-enforced it too. Like, you would think there would have been one guy in 24 years said, "You know what? I'm just gonna fuck it. Let's just mustache,
right?
Mutton chops."
If there was the one guy that did it, it was Reggie.
Yeah.
And Reggie had the pull in whatever it was, 72 or 73. Reggie was playing well enough where he could do that.
Yeah. Yeah, who's going to tell at that point? He was probably one of the top 2 or 3 sluggers in baseball. Like, yeah, you're not going to do that. He had the pull.
But how about Fingers then, when given permission, growing one of the legendary mustaches of all time?
Yeah, if you guys aren't familiar, again, Raleigh Fingers clean shave it up until that season. There's old pictures you guys can pull up from before the 72 season with Raleigh with nothing. But yeah, it's been a signature look for him for 50 years now.
Right. And the other one that I wanted to mention, and I sent it to you, but everybody else will have to look it up, my favorite baseball card of all time. So I started collecting baseball cards when I was 6 or 7. I at that time, this sounds like I'm 150 years old, but I'm only 56. But I would walk down to this local grocery store in Lannon called Juan Snyder's, and I would buy baseball cards. So 1972, I was 7 years old, and I bought a set of baseball cards, and I got this card from Denny McLain. And I had no idea who Denny McLain was at the time, the season that he had in 68 or any of that, or any of the trouble he had been in, or any of that stuff. All I looked at was, it was a traded card, and it had him in a painted-on A's uniform. And it looked like, and at that time, this is another thing people can't think about now, because you can take pictures with your cell phone, and at that time it was all these big cameras with these big flashes on them and stuff. And all I could think of when I saw this picture of Denny McLain was some dude walking up to him with one of these big cameras with a big flash and going, "Denny, you've been traded." And I sent it to you. Isn't that what it looks like?
He's like,
yeah, exactly. What? The Rangers don't want me anymore? Come on.
So, yeah, when you sent that to me, I thought long and hard about, do I have a favorite baseball card? And I don't know if I have like one single card that stands out, but the set or the design, I should say, that really has stood really the test of time, and it was such a simple design, was the 87 Topps, where they had kind of the wood paneling kind of look.
Yeah.
That's always been my favorite set, that 87 set. I think at the time I thought I was going to put my kids through college with the Jose Canseco rookie, which right now, if I were to try to sell it within this group, I might get $1.50. If someone wants to buy my next Pepsi.
Those damn steroids.
I'd still have to come up with, the tax and 50 more cents. But yeah, I love, like, I don't have many of them anymore. I either gave them away or sold a bunch, but I still have a binder of all my favorite players, like Gorman and Keith Hernandez and Robin, Lenny Dykstra. And I, every year, and I don't know if this is going to go on because Topps was just sold to Fanatics. So I don't know if they're going to keep the Topps brand, but this is the last year of Topps baseball cards as we know it. They put out every year it's called the Heritage Set, where they take an old design, like 1 year. So they'll say like the 1967 Topps, and they'll put today's players within that design.
Oh, wow.
Or they'll take older players like Mickey Mantle, Jackie Robinson, and they'll throw them into a more modern design, like the 87 or 82 set. And every year I get a couple right before the season starts. So this year it'd be April 1st. So like the last week in March, I'll get 2 boxes of that. And that's all I'm doing for my collection now. I don't really collect sets anymore. I used to, we were talking about State Fair earlier. I used to, that was the highlight of my summer, was Mom would take me to State Fair. They would all do like the animals and all that stuff. I would get my Top set, and that night I would put the whole thing together, 1 through 792, in one sitting. It took like 4 hours.
Wow.
And yeah, that was like a big, and and when you bought them, they weren't in order. So it wasn't just a matter of, putting them in by order. I had to like put them in 8 different piles. These are the 100s. These are the 200s. Then I had to put them in order that way, and it took forever. And when my daughter was old enough, we did the same thing. Took her to State Fair, got the Top set. We did it together. Took just as long. You would think with 2 people it would take half as long, but it probably took longer.
More cards.
More cards, yeah. So one of the things.
No, wait. Just hang on a second. I have one more question for you.
Sure.
And one more to throw out to the group about baseball cards. Do you remember who it was that was actually right-handed that posed left-handed for their Topps card? Because I don't. There was somebody that did that.
Well, Bob Uecker did it.
That's why it makes sense that I remember it.
I think he was either with the Cardinals or the Phillies.
Yeah.
And he actually talked about that on the Tonight Show. They said, I'm just going to mess with the guy, and he posed the other way, and they didn't catch it. I don't, like, every now and then you would see like things like that. Like Jim Gantner one year, the logo was backwards.
Oh, no kidding.
And it wasn't a Jim Gantner thing. It was a Topps thing. They just forgot to reverse the image, and it went out that way. And for, a couple years, it was like, oh, this is rare. This might be worth something. It wasn't.
Yeah.
But, or do you remember the Bill Ripken card?
No.
He was posing at a bat like
Cal
this.
Cal Ripken or Bill Ripken?
It was Bill.
Okay.
And on the knob of the bat, it said "fuckface." So it actually went out. So like if you have an original card, and I think it was like 90 Fleer or 88 Fleer. So yeah, Google that.
That's fantastic.
And you can see. I mean, it's pretty.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Maybe this year, because in the Utopian Baseball universe, I make cards. I make my own cards, and then members of the group can have their own cards. If anyone wants to be the Bill Ripken card this year, and have Bill, it's gonna be Bill.
I think that fits.
So one of the things that you and I have in common is wrestling. I don't think either one of us watches it anymore. I stopped watching probably 10 years ago.
See, what I watch now is just stuff I see on Facebook, usually. I still follow Ric Flair.
Like on social media?
Yeah, he seems to have some kind of interesting stuff.
Yeah.
But the current wrestling game, the only other thing that I actually follow, we both know Dave Hero. You know Dave, right?
I run into him all the time. When Cal was a young boy, for whatever reason, Dave would take Cal to the same place I took my daughter for haircuts.
Oh, okay.
We ran into each other probably 3 times when they were kids, and we would talk about Gene Okerlund and the old AWA and all that.
Yeah. No, because I that's the only thing I really follow now is Cal, and just how he's doing. And I kind of half joke with Cal and with Dave about when Cal's heel turn's coming.
I saw them recently at Pick and Save together. It was right before the pandemic, and I said, and I don't even know if you're aware of this, but the old NWA that you and I used to watch with the Horseman and Dusty is now actually owned by Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins.
No way!
They're not independent. I mean, it's an actual promotion now with one owner. And I always thought
Billy Corgan in wrestling. It's crazy. So
but
weird.
The weird thing is, it's actually kind of a fun promotion because it's really old school. Like they do it from the small studio. They used to do, TBS World Championship Wrestling with the Road Warriors.
Yeah,
Ronnie Garb. It's the same look. Has kind of an old school feel. And I told Cal, I said, I can see you being NWA champion one day because their brand of wrestling was very similar to what we watched as kids, where bad guys, good guys, bad guy calling the match, managers, valets.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I've been kind of disengaged from like the WWE product for probably 10 or 12 years. But I said, I could see you being in the NWA or Ring of Honor or one of these smaller ones and doing really well. I've seen a couple of his matches. He's really good, actually.
No, yeah. I mean, he's an excellent worker. And, I love his old man, obviously. WWE, as soon as Vince did roids, I mean, it just... Okay, Vince, you did roids. You're a wrestler now. What the fuck? Seriously?
Well, for me, there were 2 kind of golden eras. When I started watching in '86, so like Hulkamania, the whole like Saturday Night Main Event, WrestleMania. To me, that was always great. And then, so when I think you and I formally met in like 97, 98, you and I used to go to Skippy Yipman's in Thiensville because Walt would have his, remember the pro wrestling hotline?
Yep.
I used to pay $2 for that shit.
Yep.
To find out Chris Jericho's real name. This is before the internet. I'd give my mom like $20 every month. I said, just don't look at the phone bill. I got to find out, dark matches from, Nitro or whatever. But I remember one time Walt he made this like big announcement. He's like, hey, if you come for Starrcade, stick around after because I've got a VHS tape of ECW and it's going to be great.
Oh, and
so you and I think it was you that night. I think they had Frankie DeFalco.
So was a cool guy.
Yeah, he was like a guest. I think he was either a guest of yours or a guest of Walt's. And
him and Carmine were both very good guys.
He might have been there too that night. And we were in this like back room. So it was just like the 2 of you, me and my friend, and Walt. And we were watching a WCW pay-per-view that night. And I think it was Piper Hogan. And I still love telling this story because you and I, like, we knew of each other. We didn't really know each other that well.
Right.
But you said something that night that I do a spit take every time I think of it. It was Eddie Guerrero's first night as a heel. He turned bad like on Nitro, so he's at the pay-per-view as a bad guy. So, you know, in wrestling, they always redo the theme music.
Yeah.
If you go from good to bad, you know, good guy, it's da 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 da, and bad guy, it's darker, it's a little bit. So Eddie Guerrero gets announced, and he's clearly got different music, and it was just the way. It's not even what you said; it's the way you said it. You like stood up and you're like, "It's the Eddie Guerrero bad guy music."
Well, I'm glad you remember that.
I remember because Mike looked at me like it was like one of the funniest. It was just the way you delivered it, like you were trying to be like in sync with the melody of the music, and like almost like none of us had ever heard it before. But you're like, yeah, he's a bad guy. He needs more bass. He's a bad guy now. And Mike and I made a list shortly after that. It was, and again, this was like 98. We were making a list of like the top 100 funniest things ever. And I said, we got to put the Bill Johnson, Eddie Guerrero line on it.
Well, thank you.
I
appreciate it.
Yeah, we just, it was, again, it was I'm probably not doing it justice, but it was just like, I like that you and I were probably the only two people in the building that night that understood that if you turn bad, they have to give you facial hair, or they have to change your music, or now you have a leather jacket instead of a, you know, white jacket. And like that wrestling psychology you understood, and it was just I just had a ball like hearing you say that.
Look at the difference between Shawn Michaels 10 years as a good guy and then all of a sudden what Shawn Michaels became.
Sure.
You know? I mean, I think that's because like Flair was always a bad guy. Yeah. You know, there's some guys that were just always a bad guy, and then they kind of drifted into good guy territory for a while, but you know, Flair was always a bad guy. I guess there's some differences. Like the Road Warriors would always have Iron Man.
Yeah,
didn't matter. I saw this is when people talk about wrestling. This is the one thing that I always talk about. We saw the Road Warriors versus the Crusher and the Bruiser. Now, chronologically, this does not seem possible. But we did. It was at the Milwaukee Auditorium. It had to be 81, 82. The Road Warriors were probably in their like mid-20s. And Crusher and the Bruiser had to be 50s at least.
Yeah.
So the Road Warriors come out. And I mean, I had seen the Who at the Auditorium pretty recently. Road Warriors come out with Iron Man louder than the Who. Moments later, Crusher and the Bruiser come out with the Beer Barrel Polka louder than the Who. So, and my friends and I were all kind of clued into the whole thing, and we're like, well, how are they going to do this? I mean, how can they even wrestle? Well, Crusher and the Bruiser had a chair each in their hands, and they threw the chairs into the ring. And they threw the chairs around for a second, and then it was over. The whole thing lasted like 4 seconds, and that's the way they had to do it because there was no way that anyone in the world was going to buy. Crusher and Bruiser were going to get in there with Hawk and Animal at that point. But it was fun.
I saw a show at Brown Deer High School in 1986 or 7. It was either late 86, early 87. And Mom and I got there early, and the wrestlers actually came off of like a bus and just walked into the front of the school as if it was nothing. And that was within my first year of being a fan. So again, back then, everything was, you know, good guys and bad guys.
Yep.
There was no gray area. But on that day, my heart tremored a little bit because Colonel De Beers and Marty Jannetty walked in together. And I looked up at my mom. I'm like, but Colonel De Beers is a bad guy. So she had to explain to me that, like, what we're
Yep.
watching is a soap opera.
Yep.
Just like when Grandma watches, Young and the Restless, Victor Newman's a good guy today. He might be a bad guy at some
Well,
point, but they're just acting out scenes. And
me and Mrs. Johnson still watch Young and the Restless, by the way.
my sister was shocked to hear that it's set in Wisconsin.
Oh yeah, Genoa City.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because they had, in like 2007, they had Jeff Suppan and J.J. Hardy playing themselves on an episode. And that's when they were just starting to get good again. And I'm like, yeah, they got to take advantage of that.
Victor was going to a Brewer game.
Yeah.
So the wrestling thing. This was, I mentioned my brothers are quite a bit older than me. So 1972 or 73, my brother Jim took me to a match down at the Milwaukee Auditorium. So I was, 7 or 8, something like that. And we left, and I was absolutely beside myself because I thought that Bobby Heenan and Nick Bockwinkel and Ray Stevens had, like, killed Ivan Putski. And that was when Jim had to give me the harsh reality. But so I've known since then.
Well, and I'm not afraid to admit this, I think the people that know me the closest were aware of this. When Paul Orndorff turned on Hogan, they were on the flower shop and Orndorff needed a partner. When Orndorff turned on Hogan, I cried for like 20 minutes. And Mom was like, hey, all right, I don't want this to ruin your day or your childhood. It's a TV show. It's like a movie.
Right.
Because she was worried I was going to show up at school and like not be able to function. Because, we were watching this on Sunday nights or Sunday mornings.
How many heel turns do you think have really bothered people? I think, I'm talking about kids. But like Kurt Hennig.
On Bockwinkel?
If you watched AWA, Kurt Hennig was a good guy, even though his dad was a bad guy before he became a good guy.
Well, the two as a kid that were the most memorable were Orndorff and Andre, because the way Andre did it was very psychological. It wasn't an in-ring turn; it was on Piper's Pit,
right?
Where it was supposed to be Hogan and Andre talking about their trophies or something, and Jesse Ventura was supposed to bring out Andre, but then Heenan comes out, and you're like, "What? What? He can't be with Andre? Like, I don't understand." So those are the two as a kid, but then as I got older and started to understand, like, the Ronnie Garvin turn on Dusty was huge because nobody saw that coming.
But Dusty was a bad guy too. Dusty started out as a bad guy.
Yeah, but on this particular show, I think it was Barry Windham against Dusty, and Ronnie came out, like, where's the referee? And then he, like, taps Dusty, gives him the hands of stone, and, like, it's Jim Ross's greatest call of all time. He's like, Ronnie Garvin, Ronnie Garvin, Ronnie Garvin. And it's just like, and then they had to show, like, Tony Schiavone, like, wiping his brow, like, you couldn't believe what was happening.
Yep.
But the Hogan turn, I think, even though I was at that point 21, I think for shock value, because again, this was still pre-internet, nobody saw that coming. Did they?
Yeah. At that point, if you watched it for so long, it's just like the thing with Cal. It has to happen eventually.
Yeah.
Everybody's got to turn heel eventually.
Heenan, and I don't know if you remember that. That was the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view. Bobby Heenan, actually, if you watch that back, he kind of gives it away because Hogan's coming down to the ring, and if he wouldn't have said this, nobody would have thought anything. But Heenan goes, "But whose side is he on?"
Yep.
And I remember thinking, like, he's NWO.
Yep.
There it is. There's the light drop.
Yep.
So
no,
yeah.
And that was, you're right, with the black shirt. That's one of the great heel turns of all time. And as an aside, the guys that I met away from everything, Heenan might have been the coolest guy. I mean, he was such a nice guy.
Yeah.
He was cool. Bockwinkel was cool. It seemed like all the heels were good guys.
I only met one wrestler in my life, and it was by accident. I used to be a corporate trainer for a credit union, and every couple of weeks I'd have to go to Madison for a couple of days, and then they'd let me leave at like 11 o'clock on a Friday. And I was having lunch in Oconomowoc one day at like a bar and grill type place. And I'm having lunch.
I'm familiar.
Yeah, bar and grill in Wisconsin.
Go figure.
I'm having lunch, and this guy comes out in like sweatpants and a t-shirt, and he looks familiar. And I kind of look a little bit closer, and it's the Honky Tonk Man. And I knew his real name because this was like 2006. And I said,
"Oh, yeah."
I said, "Wayne." And he looks over. I said, "You're the Honky Tonk Man, right?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "What are you doing in Oconomowoc on a Friday at like 11 a.m.? He was setting up the ring for a show at that bar and grill that night. Like, and again, people that aren't aware, when you're in wrestling and you're at the top, that's one thing, but you're basically an independent contractor. When you're not at the top, you basically working for yourself, paycheck to paycheck kind of thing, taking these types of appearances. And I was shocked to see that he was like setting up the ring, but it was probably his, he probably booked the show.
Yeah. I have one more wrestling story for you.
I've got all the time in the world.
And this is one, I may have to open another course here for you, but this is one that my brother always reminds me of that I kind of forget every now and then. So I did, when I was working for the radio station, I did ring announcing. I did it for Carmine. And this was at a park somewhere on the south side. This was an outside show. And I was coming out to do the ring announcing for the main event. And this was Mad Dog Vachon. Mad Dog wasn't wrestling. Mad Dog was coming out there to just talk, I think, because Mad Dog was pretty old at this point. So Mad Dog and I sat there in the back room, and we had a few beers, and we talked for a little bit. And he looked at me, and he goes, Bill, he says, I live in Nebraska. I have a problem with what they're doing down there. And of course I thought, oh, Jesus Christ, this crazy old man, he's taking way too many fucking hits to the head. What the fuck is going on here? So, but I jumped right in. I said, what's wrong, Mad Dog? He goes, you know what they're doing down there? They're feeding the cows cow shit. I'm like, what? They're feeding the cows cow shit. Why would they do that? He said, they might be lumping it up to make it look like food, but they're feeding the cows cow shit. Well, sure enough, 6 months to a year later, mad cow disease shows up. Mad Dog Vachon told me about mad cow disease 6 months to a year before it happened.
That'd be like if someone in January of 2020 said, let me tell you about COVID.
Yes, exactly.
And you heard it from WWE Hall of Famer Mad Dog Vachon.
And, he still had more hair on his back than he had on his head. But, wow. And I honest to God, every time Jim comes up with this story, my older brother, he's like, I can't believe Mad Dog told you about mad cow disease before it happened. And he was right.
That's funny. You want to play some music?
Mm-hmm. You want to play some or do you want to talk about some?
Let's talk. Well, actually, yes. I want to, because you and I had a playful, civil disagreement about the Police.
Mm-hmm.
How many records did they have? 6, 5?
I think it was 6, yeah. And I think my main problem was synchronicity. Well, there's a couple problems with them. I anytime, like even Van Halen or anybody that didn't have keyboards to start with goes with keyboards, It's always a warning sign.
Kind of was the 80s, though, right? I mean,
Yeah,
at
I
that
know.
point, everyone was kind of messing around with a Moog.
Well, not Black Sabbath.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. But they were messing around with other things. I don't know. I've always thought of Synchronicity as the first solo Sting album. I've just never. I mean, it's fine. It's a decent album. It's just not my favorite Police album.
I think for me, it's all timing. Like MTV comes out in '82.
Right.
Synchronicity comes out like 6 months later.
Right.
So I wasn't even familiar with any of the Police stuff until MTV started playing all the stuff from Synchronicity, and it's like, oh, this is an older band. There's some older stuff here. For me, and I'd almost have to like listen to each album, back to back. I always thought the first four, to me, almost sounded like a quadruple album. Very kind of similar
Yeah.
tones to it, and then Synchronicity. I can't argue it. It does kind of come across as like the Sting album.
Yeah. I thought of their first two albums as their best. I liked Regatta de Blanc better than Orlando's D'Amore. Then their next two albums after that, I mean, they're kind of in the hunt with Synchronicity for me. I mean, They're okay, but they're all right. I thought their first two albums were magnificent. I thought the rest of the punk bands were just kind of faking it. I mean, I saw Black Flag. And they were supposed to be the ultimate punk band. They sucked. They were terrible. They just, I would have loved to have seen the Clash. I never had the opportunity. That would have been great because I thought they were okay. I didn't, out of all the punk bands, I didn't think they were total frauds. I think the rest of the punk bands were right in that total fraud category. I love the Police. I love their first two albums. I liked their next two, and I liked Synchronicity, but I didn't. It wasn't my favorite.
I wonder, and I'm sure that there's some sort of documentation about this. I wonder how Andy Summers and Stuart Copeland felt about that last record, because I thought just sonically a lot of the stuff that Andy Summers was doing on that record was really good. But again, it is a more commercial record. There's probably 3 or 4 songs there that as soon as you hear them, like, okay, this is a radio hit. It doesn't sound like they're trying to even put out an album. It's just they're trying to get on the radio. And I don't know if that's the biggest crime in the world, but I'd be interested to hear what they thought. Have you seen the I don't even know what it's called, but there was a documentary that Stuart Copeland's son did on their reunion from like 06.
No, I would love to see that. I have not seen that.
I don't even know what it's called, but it's they put out a documentary and then like a complimentary live show from 2008. Certified is what it's called.
Okay,
and it's really
they were kind of famous for throwing in a surprise live show every now and then. Which was I always thought was cool about them.
When I did the last time I did like a huge long baseball trip was 2008. We did 6 stadiums in 9 days, and towards the end of it, Elvis Costello and the Police were playing a one-off show on the Summerfest grounds. It wasn't during Summerfest. And I said to my father-in-law, I said, do you like either of these artists? And he said, nah, not really. Had he said yes, we would have skipped because one of our 6 games was County Stadium or Miller Park. It was the same night that the Brewers were playing, and it was the last game of our trip. I would have skipped that to see that show. And I kind of wish we would have had, because that would have been my only chance to see the Police. And it actually would have been the first time I would have seen Elvis Costello. Now, I've seen him since. And the record he just put out a couple days ago is really good. Probably his best in like 9 or 10 years. But I sometimes think back, I really wish I would have seen that show.
Yeah, no, I would have loved to have seen them when they were at their peak with just the three of them. That would have been great.
What's your favorite Beatles album?
Oh boy, um, oh man, I have to go with Revolver.
That's me too.
Yeah.
My dad loved Rubber Soul.
No, I mean, and
Yeah,
that's right there.
sure.
You know.
My daughter, actually, the last gift that my dad gave my daughter before he passed was he had a framed copy of Beatles 65.
Yeah.
So for her birthday, I think it was her seventh birthday, she got a framed copy of Beatles 65. And without skipping a beat, she's like, "Oh, the new Beatles album." Because she hadn't heard it yet. She just figured it was new. And I said,
No,
"Well,
and
it's new to you."
I guess I should be fair. I mean, Sergeant Pepper was, you know, when I started listening, I mean, it was so good, and now I kind of downgrade Sergeant Pepper, but I still, you know, of all the albums, and especially with the British version, Revolver.
Yeah.
Um, I like the late stuff. I mean, I like what they were doing. I think I downgrade it because it makes me so sad because where they were personally.
Yeah.
Um, because you can't really tell the difference between Let It Be and Abbey Road. It's all kind of the same stuff, but that was all good music, and they were all so young. Especially now we think about it. You're 46, I'm 56. Shit, they were all under 30 when they did that. I mean,
Yeah.
think
That's
about
weird to
that.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah, they left, I think, what they officially broke up in what, 70?
Well, yeah, but Lennon left right after they did Abbey Road. So
Yeah.
Lennon left in September of 69.
Yeah. I still haven't seen the documentary. Um, I think I might be waiting for the DVD because I think the documentary is 8 hours, but the DVD is going to be like 16 hours.
Oh, I don't know. I just saw the thing that was on Disney Plus.
Yeah,
It
that's
was
what I'm.
fine. The Let It Be thing was
Yeah.
fine. Yeah, I mean it was good, but it was kind of I was with Peter Jackson involved. I thought there'd be a narrator because there was the old Let It Be album that they took or movie that they took off the market.
Yeah.
That I used to sit there and watch at the library in Stevens Point instead of studying. Um, it wasn't that much different. It was just longer,
Yeah.
But I mean, it was cool. I still liked it. People that aren't total geeks wouldn't probably like it, but I liked it.
I always loved those type of documentaries. The Foo Fighters one, Back and Forth, where they document basically from the start of Nirvana through whatever record they were recording
Yeah.
like 10 years ago. I love stuff like that.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring up the Foo Fighters because I love Dave Grohl, and I've posted that the video of them doing rock and roll with John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page, and with Taylor Hawkins singing lead. It's so good. You can't help but smile watching that.
Yeah, they're. I think they just released. I don't know what it's called, but they released like some quarantine recordings of just covers. I think it's Dave Grohl, another, I guess, lesser known musician, and I think his daughter even provides some vocals, and it's all covers. It's Billy Joel. It's
Wow.
maybe some Zeppelin, and I think they just
pretty
released
cool.
two volumes of that on iTunes recently.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
So, what kind of stuff are you going to play for us tonight?
Oh God, I have no idea.
Bill's an accomplished musician.
No, I am not.
Yes, I mean you're good. You're good. I watch your shows.
Oh God, I have no clue what I would play for you guys. All right.
What's your favorite stuff to play? Like when you're doing your shows on Monday nights. So, what do you enjoy the most?
Well, it depends on what day it is, I guess. Little Pink Floyd, little country. I mean, there's all kinds of different things. So, it just depends on when I pick up the guitar. But yeah, just
Whatever mood you're in at that particular time.
all right. Well, let's see. I'll get the guitar that I'm grabbing is called Aunt June. It's because when my wife's Aunt June died, I inherited this guitar. Um, my friend Elwood, who is one of the most accomplished musicians I know, put classical strings on the thing, and I just kind of play it. I put a bunch of stickers on it, my favorite bands. So hold on. All right. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Good. I can't hear you. Come on, cat. Jesus.
All right. Bill's going to play some music for us here in a second.
I'll figure something out. Hang on.
Bill does shows usually, I think, on Monday nights about 8 o'clock. He'll just pop up on my feed. I'm like, all right, this is what I'm doing now.
Hang on. We got to make sure we're tuned up. Kitty, move on. Hold on. All right. Yep, I'm still here. Sorry. Hang on. I'll figure something out. Ooh, there's the issue. Nah. I'll figure something else out. Hang on.
All right, he's rolling up his sleeves.
blue skies remain. Shit. Sorry, can't remember that one. Hang on. Easier song. Well, may as well do the first one my guitar teacher taught me. Purple haze in my brain. Lately things, they don't seem the same. Acting funny, but I don't know why. Excuse me while I kiss the sky. Purple haze all around. Don't know if I'm going up or down. Never happy endlessly. Whatever it is, that girl put a spell on me. Shit. Lost my pick. All right, I tried. Hang on. Let me get my headphones back on. Hold on. Oh, well. Yep, I'm back. Sorry.
No, that's okay. And we got you. We got audio of you, but your screen is black. So we'll wait until. I don't know if that's. Oh, there we go. There we go.
Yep, there we are.
Well, Bill,
Sorry.
you have you have an open invitation at any time to take over these airwaves and either play or talk sports within the Utopian baseball universe. And I may have to pick your brain between now and mid-February as we start to fill this Brewers roster of all the favorites going back to 1971. We're thinking of adding Charlie Moore.
God.
So we've got, I think, probably 5 or 6 roster spots left. I might have you have say in at least a couple of those.
Do we have George Scott at first base?
So
or Cecil Cooper? That's a tough one.
We have Cooper and Fielder, but when I started the Utopian Baseball universe and we added the Expos and the Durham Bulls to make it 32 teams, I put George Scott as the third first baseman on the Durham Bulls.
Oh boy!
So he's behind Johnny Mize and Dick Allen.
The Boomer was my guy when I was a kid. They had the Boomer and then Dave May in center field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the things that I had in mind when building the roster is I wasn't necessarily looking for the best players from each team. I was looking for favorites first.
Yeah.
So that's why Gorman Thomas and Rob Deere will always be Brewers within the Utopian. I can name, 10 better outfielders, but those two were my favorite. But George Scott, I wanted in the universe, but I wanted him to get at bats, and I figured, well, maybe he'll get some more at bats in Durham, but he's in there for sure.
Oh man, there's so many. I mean, of those old early '70s Brewers.
Yeah.
But you mentioned a few of the best for sure, and I mean, obviously, Robin Yount is a Hall of Famer. He's a great player.
And I actually have him
Paul
at
Molitor.
shortstop within this, so I figure he's going to get, keep him at shortstop, keep Molitor at third. I don't use a DH. So I think my starting outfield is Yelich, Thomas, and Deere, just because Thomas and Deere are my two favorites, and then you can't argue with what Yelich has done the last 4 years.
No, absolutely not. But, and Gorman was just Gorman.
The reason I liked him as a kid, he looked like my dad. I don't know if I have pictures that I could post, but I had friends would say that. He's like, your dad looks like Gorman Thomas. My dad had a big beard and longer hair.
but everybody knew he was crazy. It was like Vukovic. I mean,
Yeah.
everybody knew they were nuts. Um, I mean, you were too young to ever go to their bar. I mean,
My dad used to tell me, my dad used to hang out with them. And my dad, we were talking about like finding out that wrestling wasn't real. My dad would come home and say, boy, Joey's going to be heartbroken when he finds out that Gorman and Vuk smoke.
well, I did too. Shit.
I mean, I think I was 6 at the time or something. And yeah, I remember,
Yeah,
I'm like, you
that'd
didn't
be
have to,
about
you
right.
didn't have to tell me
Because
that.
I mean, I was 13 or 14 when I
Yeah.
started smoking.
Yeah. Well, Bill, like I said, anytime you want to come back and play or talk Packers, you have a open contract, as Jimmy Hart used to say, in reference to Danny Davis. Come back at
I
any
love
time.
I love the Jimmy Hart reference. Yeah.
I always got a
'Cause
Jimmy Hart reference for you.
Well, and I think the thing here, Joey, is I don't think we'll ever have a problem finding something to talk about.
I mean,
'Cause I think
we could have done 2 hours on wrestling. I think we
Yeah.
could. I mean, we could, and maybe that's the next project is Bill and I just breaking down every WrestleMania from 1985 till when we stopped watching.
Well, but see, I watched a lot of NWA too.
Yeah, well, we can hit all
Watched
the
a lot of
Starcades.
NWA. I watched a lot of the Von Erichs. I mean,
I think I may have actually mentioned this to you at some point. Peacock owns the right now to all the old wrestling footage. Like they bought the WWE network, so anything from WWE, NWA, AWA, Von Erichs is all owned by NBC.
Mid-South, all that stuff.
Mid-South, Smoky Mountain,
My
ECW.
God.
They have 100,000 hours on Peacock. Here's an idea for a show. You've seen MST3K, right?
Yeah.
Here's the idea for the show. I don't even know what we're going to call it, but people are going to watch you and me watch old wrestling and comment on it. So like one night we'll just have like a world-class show from 85 when it was still the Dingo Warrior and Ravishing Rick Rude. And they'll just see the backs of our heads watching world class. And
Big Scott Hall.
Big Scott Hall. Gator Scott Hall.
Think about Big Scott Hall. I mean,
I know he had some weird. And do you remember Kevin Nash was Oz for like 10 minutes?
Yeah.
He'd come out in this like green robe, white hair, big beard. What do you guys think? Bill and I wrestling.
They were just throwing out whatever they could throw out,
Yeah.
And what worked, they would stick with, and what didn't work, they would move on to something else. But they knew they had these big athletic guys that they could do something with. So,
well, I think it's going to happen.
The only thing that really it's interesting. I don't know why it pisses me off so much because the other promoters all wrestled. But when McMahon did steroids and became a wrestler, it just pissed me off.
I think the storyline that he had with Austin was brilliant, but it never needed to get to a match. And that's where I think it got weird because it's not believable. Austin versus McMahon, even if he's on steroids, is not believable, whereas Austin versus Rock is. Undertaker versus Triple H is. And then when you start having Vince McMahon wrestle, and then there was a pay-per-view, I don't know if you remember this, where they had Howard Finkel wrestle. Come on.
And that's where they went, because, it was never that reputable of a business anyway, but we enjoyed it until that point. I saw a thing on Facebook the other day with, Shawn Michaels wrestling McMahon. And McMahon is obviously roided up and gigantic and whatever. But it didn't appeal to me in any way. I mean,
it stopped being fun for me, I don't know, about 12 years ago. I just thought the writing was so bad. Because when I was a kid, and again, maybe you just tend to gravitate towards things that happened during childhood, but the storylines when I was a kid were so compelling, like the Danny Davis storyline, like having an evil referee, I thought was genius. And then the way they turned the Honky Tonk Man, who wasn't getting over by any means, and they just overnight said he's a bad guy, and they kept the belt on him for like 15 months, and he never won a match. He would just get disqualified or get counted out. But it
Right.
created heat, and that's what you're supposed to do in wrestling, is get you to hate the guy, and it was just genius.
But did they just keep him around because he was Lawler's cousin?
Lawler wasn't even employed by them at that point. Lawler
Okay.
was still doing his own Mid-South thing. The guy, here's actually a funny story. Ricky Steamboat, when he wins the belt at WrestleMania 3, he immediately goes into Vince's office and says, hey, I'd like to take some time off because Bonnie's pregnant. We're going to have a baby boy. And Vince said, I just put the belt on you in the greatest match ever. We got to stick to the storyline for at least 6 months. And Ricky Steamboat said, well, I can't do it. I guess I'll drop the belt. And they were doing a TV taping, and Vince McMahon handpicked Butch Reed to win the Intercontinental title, and he no-shows the TV taping. So like an hour before they're supposed to tape like 4 weeks of shows.
So is this blonde Butch Reed, or is this still good guy Butch Reed?
This is bad guy, slick managing.
Oh, okay.
So and they just brought him in, so he was gonna have a nice heel run, and he no shows, like no call, no shows the event, and Vince McMahon is like in the back, like, I already said we're gonna take the belt off Steamboat. He asks Hogan, what should we do? And Hogan points to the Honky Tonk Man and says, give it to him. They literally wrote that segment in like 10 minutes and kept the belt on him for, I don't know, a year and 3 months until they put it on the Warrior, who had come in maybe 6 months later, and they said, all right, well, now we got to build this guy up for an eventual WrestleMania. But I miss that formula of just taking a guy, loving to hate him. Like one of the best bad guys ever, Paul Orndorff. He was terrible as a good guy, but he was so entertaining as a bad guy. And I think Honky Tonk Man, same. I can't remember anything he did as a good guy.
It's weird because I remember Orndorff as a good guy. I think he was convincing as a good guy. That's why that's one of those heel turns that I remember. I remember Orndorff turning heel, and I thought he was all right.
I mean, he was, but I just thought he was a better character as a bad guy because he was so demeaning. Like, do you remember that old show TNT where it was like a talk show setting, and they'd show
Right.
Orndorff at a gym just talking down to women and, oh, you're too fat and this and that. He was more entertaining.
I always thought most of what Orndorff did as a heel was because of whoever was managing him.
Yeah, I mean, back then the manager was the mouthpiece for a lot of it, but I guess because I was so young that's my earliest memory, because when I started watching wrestling was about a year after WrestleMania debuted. So the first show I ever saw was WrestleMania 2 because it was on HBO, and he was a good guy. And I liked the show back then. I'm like, oh, I want to rent the first one. And he was in the main event as a bad guy. And I'm like, I don't understand. I thought he was a good guy. And then as I started to understand kind of the storyline arc, I'm like, oh, he was a bad guy. He fired Heenan. Now he's a good guy. Now because, back then, again, people forget, there wasn't a plan to do Hogan Andre for WrestleMania 3.
Right.
Vince wanted Nikita Koloff to come in and have Hogan Koloff. And when that didn't happen, they needed a heel. And
Nikita was another guy that moved to Nebraska, which is weird. But him and Mad Dog both moved to Nebraska.
That's so funny. Yeah, I don't know. I guess, like, Roddy Piper's another example. He was okay as a good guy, but he was the best bad guy for
better bad guy. Yeah. No, I agree with you on him. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was always good to get pissed off at the bad guy. He was always that kind of good guy turn for a second and then go back to the, yeah. No, it was all psychological. It was all so cool. But like I've always said, the best guys that I met were heels for most of their career.
Yeah.
You know, Heenan, Bockwinkel, Baron von Raschke, the first three that I think of, and they were always they were so nice. They were good guys. They were always very, you know, even when they were in character with the fans, they were always. I mean, at our signings and stuff, whatever
Sure.
I was doing, they were always cool. You know, they weren't jerks.
Yeah.
They were always very giving. You know, but I met a bunch of faces that were just like assholes.
Interesting. Yeah, that's funny. I remember there was a business that was on, I think it was 124th and Layton or something like that. It was called Kowalski Brothers.
Okay.
And they made like bowling trophies and like plaques. It was a family business.
Okay.
And one night on WCW Saturday Night, Bobby Heenan name dropped them like 3 times.
Wow.
And I thought that was cool because that's where that's actually where I get my bowling balls drilled, was Kowalski Brothers.
Yeah.
And that's odd. That's a real business. And I learned years later that I guess because he's originally from Minnesota, right? I know he was billed as
Right.
California, but he had
he's
some
from
ties to Milwaukee.
Twin Cities area. Yeah.
Yeah, but he
was in Milwaukee a lot.
Yeah, because the AWA did like half their shows here, right? It was
Yep.
like Minnesota, Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison. They did most of their house shows here, and then they do TV from Vegas like once every 3 months or whatever it was.
But I mean, that was very late in the game when they
Yeah.
did that. Most of it was like a studio in Minneapolis
Yeah.
where they did their Sunday morning show.
Yeah,
And then they did, I mean, all their house shows were right here in the Midwest.
yeah, yeah. That's where I saw when I saw them as a kid. They did Brown Deer High School, and it was. I don't even remember the card. I just remember like questioning God when I saw Colonel De Beers walking in with a good guy. I'm like, is he even from South Africa? It turns out he's not. You know,
the other one that I have to tell you about before we leave.
Yeah.
So we always joked about how many retirement shows Vern Gagne did. Because I personally saw at least 3 retirement shows that Vern Gagne did at the arena or the auditorium. So we were at one of those, and it was at the auditorium. And I was there with my friends that I always went to the thing with. It was probably 81 or 82. We were in high school. And all of a sudden, my friend Mark Dreckman, who had a tin of Skoal or Copenhagen in his back pocket, hears this big voice from behind go, "Hey, man, you got a dip?" Jesse the Body Ventura. And, of course, Dreckman gave him a dip. But, yeah, we were all sitting there watching Vern Gagne retire, and they're the future governor of Minnesota.
He was my governor for 8 months. I lived in Egan for 8 months in 2002. The most transparent politician I've ever. Well, I can't say I met him, but you just say whatever's on his mind. He didn't BS.
Sure. Yeah. It's refreshing. It's
We need
almost
more.
like, you want Jimmy Valiant as your governor.
Well, Bill, I want to thank you so much for having a catch with me. Again, we could do this.
Yeah. Anytime.
Like we could make this
Just
a
call
regular
me.
thing, but let's think about planting the seeds for this MST3K type show where people watch us watch wrestling.
Oh, God.
I'll make it happen.
Old wrestling.
Old wrestling. The key is it's got to be from like the 70s and 80s.
Yep.
Like Saturday night's main event, the old studio show.
For me, it was Sunday morning. I would always have to hurry home from church to watch, Nick
Bruno
Bockwinkel and Vern Gagne and George Scrap Iron Gadaski, those guys.
I'll try to I'll catalog it. I'll make sure that it's all stuff from that era, and then we'll figure it out. But I think that'd be as entertaining as watching the wrestling is just you and I commenting on it.
Well, and can we at least get 1 or 2 matches with Jake the Milkman Milliman? Because when I was working for the radio station, Jake was the bodyguard at Heartbreakers. So we would do events at Heartbreakers every now and then, and Jake was there, and we'd just sit there and shoot the shit with him, and he was a good guy too. And he might still be a good guy. I don't know.
We'll make sure that's you know what, and it's funny because of all the territories they have on Peacock, for whatever reason, the AWA is the one they have the least amount of footage on, which is silly because it's a lot of Hogan and Michaels and Scott Hall and even Vader when he was the baby bull is
Kurt Hennig,
Roadies,
the Valiants.
Yeah,
I mean they were all there.
Jesse was there for
That's
Adonis.
Yeah.
Adonis
Adonis before he got real gigantic. Adonis was a great worker. I mean, Jerry Blackwell was a great. I mean, for big fat guys, they were great workers. Fantastic workers.
Yeah. And what's weird, I was looking at. I saw something on Facebook recently. They showed everyone from WrestleMania 3 that's passed away, and there's been 31 people that have passed away from that show. Adrian Adonis, on that show, he wrestled Roddy Piper, Piper's retirement match. Adonis was 32 on that day.
Wow.
And he passed away like 15 months later. He was in a car accident. Yeah. But to think he was only 32.
Well, you think about those guys, though, too. I mean, how many of them died in car accidents? Because
Joey Morella died in a car accident. He fell asleep at the wheel. Randy Savage had a heart attack driving his car.
Yeah.
Junkyard Dog fell asleep.
Because they had to go from one place to another.
Yeah. They drove themselves. JYD actually was at his daughter's graduation and was either leaving it or heading to it and fell asleep at the wheel because he was coming from a independent show where he probably made $50 that night.
Yeah. But I mean, that's the way it worked. You know?
All right. Well,
but you know what? I appreciated doing that stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, I kind of felt bad a lot of times when I was the ring announcer for that stuff, and I felt like I was making more money than the guys that were actually wrestling. I felt bad. I didn't feel that bad because I made the money, but I would look at the guys that were making the, actually doing the job and going, wow, really?
Yeah. There's a lot of documentary, I think there's a Jake the Snake documentary where those guys basically, there was no 401k, there was no anything like that. You had to save, and if you didn't, that's why
for whatever company you worked for. Mm-hmm. I mean, even most of WWF, I think. There was no insurance or anything like that.
Yeah, and everything was out of pocket. Like it's not like WWE gave them a per diem or it's just all right. Get to the next town. Yeah. A lot of those guys, even the guys that were making a lot of money, would just sleep in their car, or they'd have 5 guys split a $200 room or whatever. But it's crazy.
Yeah. No, and considering what they were doing and the number of people that they were entertaining. It's pretty damn amazing, and might piss you off if you think about it too much.
Yeah, Jesse Ventura actually has a couple shoot interviews where he tried to unionize wrestling in the 80s, and that's pretty much what led to him being kind of blackballed from the industry. I mean, we haven't seen Jesse Ventura in a wrestling capacity in almost 30 years.
No, and that's why.
Yeah,
because the business still exists. With whatever few TV things are open, but it's still kind of an independent business.
Yeah.
And you got to kind of hang on to yourself. I mean, I had a friend that I won't mention by name that hurt himself during a wrestling event, and he was a garbage man. And I said, well, are you okay? And he said, well, I guess I'll just have to fall off the garbage truck tomorrow. But that's, I mean, how many of them had to do that? You know?
It's crazy. All right. Well, again, thank you for having a catch with
How
me
much
tonight.
longer could we actually go?
Oh, all night.
I mean,
We
really.
could go all night. That's why we're
I
gonna have our own show, and we're gonna do this on a regular basis. Because I could talk wrestling
Good.
all night. I mean,
Well, and I mean, there's so many other things. There's music.
Yeah.
There's baseball. So many other things.
you're gonna see a lot of Bill Johnson in the future within this group because we got so much potential for stuff. And I don't, did I mention this to you when we were doing the pre-interview? When I advertised you for the show, within a half hour, I had probably half a dozen people say, "Is that the Bill Johnson?" I said, "Yes, it is."
The disgraced radio host, Bill.
They're like, "Oh, I loved him," and I said, "Yeah, that's the
Well,
Bill
good.
Johnson."
I'm sure somebody still remembers me. I'm glad. Let's go.
Well, you were a big part of my afternoons for many years, and your show with Steve is still my favorite afternoon show.
Here, look at this cat. See?
Yeah.
She's invading the broadcast.
All right. Well, again, thanks to Bill Johnson. Again, we're going to see him again in the future. Next week, Tuesday, I've got Peter Golenbach. That's going to be a big thrill for me again, one of my favorite writers. So everyone have a great night. And again, we'll see Bill very soon.
All right.
Take care, guys.